The day humanity was cast out from the galaxy began like any other day on the Great Council Station. Ships from a dozen different species docked at the massive orbital platform. Diplomats walked through gleaming corridors. Trade agreements were signed. Wars were ended. The Galactic Council had kept peace among the stars for 10,000 years, and they believed nothing could challenge their authority. In the grand chamber at the heart of the station, 12 representatives sat in a circle. Each one spoke for billions of their kind. The Valari with their silver skin and 4 arms. The Korath with their massive bodies and gentle eyes. The Zindari who communicated through light patterns on their crystalline bodies. And 10 other species, each ancient, each powerful, each convinced that they understood how the universe worked. High Arbiter Zelvax presided over the council. His species, the Orani, had led the council since its founding. He was old even by their standards, having served for 300 years. He had seen empires rise and fall. He had negotiated treaties between species that had been at war for millennia. He believed he had seen everything the galaxy could offer. He was wrong. The human delegation arrived in a small ship. It was primitive by council standards, barely capable of faster than light travel. When the humans stepped onto the station, other species stared at them with curiosity. They were so strange-looking with their soft skin and their 2 eyes and their awkward movements in the artificial gravity. They seemed harmless, almost childlike. Ambassador William Hayes led the human delegation. He was a tall man with gray hair and kind eyes. He had spent his entire life preparing for this moment. When humanity had discovered faster than light travel, they had dreamed of meeting other intelligent species. They had imagined friendship. They had imagined learning from ancient civilizations. They had imagined taking their place among the stars. William Hayes walked into the council chamber with hope in his heart. He did not know that his species had already been judged. Councillor Thrin of the Valari had been watching humanity for decades. The Valari had discovered the humans long before the humans had discovered them. They had studied Earth from hidden observation posts. They had analyzed human history. They had watched the wars, the genocides, the weapons of mass destruction. They had seen a species that solved its problems through violence. Thrin was afraid. The Valari were not warriors. They were scholars and artists. They had survived for 1,000,000 years by avoiding conflict. And now a new species had emerged, one that seemed designed for war. A species that advanced technologically at a rate the Valari had never seen. A species that might one day threaten everything the council had built. Thrin had spent years building support for what he was about to do. He had shared his evidence with other council members. He had whispered his fears in private meetings. He had convinced enough of them that humanity was too dangerous to be allowed into galactic society. When Ambassador Hayes finished his speech about peace and cooperation, Thrin rose from his seat. He activated a holographic display that showed images from human history. Wars that had killed millions. Bombs that had destroyed cities. Weapons that could poison the land for generations. He showed the council everything that humanity had done to itself. Ambassador Hayes tried to explain. He spoke of how humanity had learned from its mistakes. He talked about their art and their music and their capacity for love. He promised that humans would be peaceful members of the galactic community. But Thrin had prepared too well. Every time Hayes made an argument, Thrin had a counter. Every promise of peace was met with evidence of past violence. The council listened and their fear grew. High Arbiter Zelvax called for a vote. The question was simple. Should humanity be allowed to join the Galactic Council? Or should they be removed from civilized space before they could become a threat? The vote was unanimous. 12 species agreed that humanity was too dangerous. The decision was made in less than an hour. Ambassador Hayes stood in shock as the sentence was read. Humanity was to be exiled to the outer rim of the galaxy, a region of space so hostile that no council species had ever tried to colonize it. Radiation storms swept through it constantly. Resources were scarce. The conditions were barely survivable. The humans were given 30 days to evacuate Earth and all their colonies. They were allowed to take only basic supplies. Any advanced technology would be confiscated. Any ship that tried to remain in council space would be destroyed. Hayes begged the council to reconsider. He fell to his knees and pleaded for mercy. But the council members looked away. They had convinced themselves that this was necessary, that they were protecting the galaxy from a future threat. 8 billion humans boarded colony ships and left their home. They watched through windows as Earth grew smaller and smaller behind them. They saw the automated defense platforms take position around their solar system. They understood that they could never return. Captain Marcus Carter commanded one of the largest colony ships. His vessel carried 200,000 people into the unknown. He stood on the bridge and watched the stars change as they traveled further and further from everything they had known. His daughter, Elena, was only 6 years old. She asked him where they were going. He told her they were going to find a new home. She asked him why they had to leave. He did not know how to explain that the galaxy had decided they were monsters. The journey to the outer rim took 3 months. Many ships were lost along the way. Engines failed. Life support systems broke down. Radiation storms destroyed entire convoys. By the time the survivors reached their destination, they had lost nearly 1 billion people. The outer rim was worse than anyone had imagined. The planets were barren. The stars were unstable. The space between worlds was filled with hazards that had no names. The council had sent them here to die. High Arbiter Zelvax recorded a final message for the historical archives. He stated that the human species had been successfully relocated and that the threat had been neutralized. He predicted that they would not survive more than a generation. But Zelvax did not understand humans. He did not understand what they could become when they were pushed to the edge of extinction. He did not understand that the very qualities that made them dangerous also made them survivors. In the cold darkness of the outer rim, humanity began to adapt. They had been cast out. They had been forgotten. They had been left to die. They would not die. They would grow stronger. And one day, they would return. The first winter on Nova Terra killed 30,000 people. The planet had seemed promising when the colony ships arrived. It had breathable air and liquid water. It had soil that might support crops. But nobody had expected the cold. Temperatures dropped to levels that no human had ever experienced. The colony's heating systems were designed for Earth conditions. They failed within weeks. Families huddled together in shelters made from ship hulls. Parents gave their blankets to children and froze in the night. Captain Marcus Carter worked without sleep for days. He organized rescue teams. He rationed food. He made impossible decisions about who would receive medicine and who would not. When his own wife fell sick with a fever, he gave her medicine to a pregnant woman instead. His wife died 3 days later. His daughter Elena stood beside him at the memorial service. She was only 7 years old, but she did not cry. She had learned that tears would freeze on her face. She had learned that survival required strength. She held her father's hand and made a silent promise that she would never be weak again. The first decade was the hardest. Half of the surviving population died from disease, starvation, or accidents. The outer rim was not meant for life. Every day brought new challenges. Radiation from unstable stars damaged equipment. Strange microorganisms infected crops. Storms of charged particles disrupted communications between settlements, but humans adapted. They always had. Dr. Samuel Cole was a physicist who had been studying theoretical energy systems before the exile. On Earth, His work had been considered impractical. The Council species had already developed fusion reactors that worked perfectly well. Nobody needed new energy sources. In the Outer Rim, Dr. Cole discovered that the established rules did not apply. The exotic matter that drifted between stars could be harvested. It contained energy densities that seemed impossible according to standard physics. Within 5 years, he had built the first zero-point reactor. It produced more power than an entire fleet of Council fusion plants. His grandson continued his work. His great-grandson improved upon it further. Each generation of Cole scientists pushed the boundaries of what was possible. They were not limited by the assumptions of Council science. They were not told that certain things could not be done. They simply did them. Lieutenant Commander Sarah Bennett came from a family of soldiers. Her ancestors had served in every human conflict for 500 years. When the exile began, many people thought that military skills would be useless. They were wrong. The Outer Rim was full of dangers that required fighting. Predatory creatures on colony worlds. Pirates who preyed on supply convoys. Rival human factions who competed for resources in the early years. Sarah Bennett's grandmother organized the first unified defense force. Her mother turned it into a proper navy. Sarah herself would one day command entire battle groups. The civil wars lasted for almost a century. Different colonies had different ideas about how humanity should be governed. Some wanted democracy. Some wanted military rule. Some wanted to return to Council space and beg for forgiveness. The fighting was brutal, and many died. Elena Carter, now an old woman, helped end the wars. She had become a leader among the survivors. People listened to her because she had endured everything they had endured. She had lost her mother in the first winter. She had lost her father to a radiation storm 20 years later. She had lost 2 husbands and 3 children to various disasters. But she had never broken. Elena proposed a new government called the Terran Sovereignty. It would unite all human colonies under a single banner. Every citizen would serve for a period of time, either in the military or in civilian support roles. Resources would be shared equally, and the entire civilization would dedicate itself to one goal. That goal was simple. Humanity would become so strong that no one could ever cast them out again. The sovereignty transformed human society. Schools taught children about the exile from their earliest years. They learned about the Council's betrayal. They learned about the millions who had died in the journey and the first terrible decades. They learned to channel their grief into determination. Admiral Ryan Marshall's family had been engineers on one of the first colony ships. They built things. They fixed things. They made things work when they should have failed. Ryan's great-grandfather constructed the first orbital shipyard above Nova Terra. It was crude by later standards, barely able to produce simple vessels. But each generation improved upon what came before. Ryan's grandfather built ships that could withstand radiation storms. His father designed engines that traveled faster than anything the Council possessed. Ryan himself would oversee the construction of the warship that would change everything. The USS Sentinel took 50 years to build. It was 3 kilometers long. Its hull was made from alloys that did not exist in Council databases. Its weapons could crack planets. Its shields could absorb firepower that would destroy entire fleets. It was the most powerful vessel ever constructed by any species in the history of the galaxy. Captain Daniel Carter assumed command of the Sentinel on the 300th anniversary of the exile. He was the direct descendant of Marcus Carter, who had led one of the first colony ships. He had been trained from birth for this moment. He had studied tactics and strategy. He had learned every system on the ship. He had prepared himself to face the species that had tried to murder his people. Commander Laura Bennett served as his second in command. She was the latest in a long line of warriors. Dr. Nathan Cole was his chief scientist. Carrying on his family's tradition of pushing the boundaries of physics. Lieutenant Kevin Brooks was his weapons officer, a young man with steady hands and perfect accuracy. On the day of the anniversary, Captain Carter stood on the bridge of the Sentinel and looked at his crew. They had all lost ancestors to the exile. They all carried the memory of what had been done to their people. But they also carried something else. They carried hope. Carter opened a channel to the entire human fleet. 400 warships waited for his signal. 2 million sailors stood ready at their posts. Behind them, the civilization of the Terran sovereignty hummed with purpose. He spoke only a few words. Our ancestors were told they would die in the dark. Instead, they built a fire that will light the galaxy. Today, we go home. The fleet jumped to faster than light speed. They crossed a distance that had taken their ancestors months in mere hours. They were going back to Council space. They were going to show the galaxy what humanity had become. High Arbiter Zelvax was having an ordinary day when the universe changed. He sat in his private chamber reviewing trade agreements between 3 member species. A border dispute had been going on for decades, and both sides wanted the Council to resolve it. He was tired of these petty conflicts. He was old, and he wanted to retire. An aide rushed into his chamber without knocking. This had never happened before. Council protocol demanded respect for the High Arbiter's privacy. But the aide's face was pale, and his hands were shaking. Something was crossing the boundary, he said. Something massive. Something that should not exist. Zelvax walked to the observation deck of the Council station. Other diplomats and officials were already there, staring out the windows at the scanner displays. At first, he did not understand what he was seeing. The energy readings were so large that they seemed like an error. Then the ships appeared. They dropped out of faster than light, travel in perfect formation. 400 vessels arranged in precise rows. They were unlike anything the Council had ever seen. They were sleek and dark. They radiated power. Even from a distance, Zelvax could feel that these ships were dangerous. The largest ship was in the center of the formation. It was 3 kilometers long, dwarfing even the biggest Council warships. It moved with a grace that seemed impossible for something so massive. Its hull was covered in weapons that Zelvax could not identify. It was beautiful and terrifying at the same time. Councillor Thrin pushed his way to the front of the crowd. He was old now, nearly as old as Zelvax. He had spent 3 centuries believing that he had saved the galaxy from a terrible threat. Now his silver skin turned pale as he recognized the ship configurations. Humans, he whispered. The humans have returned. The chamber erupted into chaos. Species that had been enemies for millennia suddenly forgot their disputes. They all shared the same fear. The species they had exiled to die had come back. And they had brought an army. Captain Daniel Carter sat in the command chair of the USS Sentinel and watched the panic spread through Council space. His sensors could detect everything. The emergency communications between Council members. The frantic mobilization of military forces. The fear that pulsed through the massive station like a heartbeat. Commander Laura Bennett stood beside him, studying tactical displays. The Council is scrambling their fleets, she reported. They have approximately 2,000 warships within range. They could be here in 6 hours. Carter nodded calmly. He had expected this. He had planned for it. 2,000 ships against 400. The Council probably thought they had overwhelming numbers. They did not understand what human ships could do. Lieutenant Kevin Brooks looked up from his weapons console. Sir, I have target locks on every Council vessel within range. I can disable their engines before they even know we have fired. Carter shook his head. We did not come here to start a war, Lieutenant. We came here to end one. He pressed a button on his chair and opened a channel to the Council's communication. Network. His voice echoed through every speaker on the Council station. This is Captain Daniel Carter of the Terran sovereignty vessel Sentinel. 300 years ago, you cast our people into the void. We have returned. We request an audience with the Galactic Council to discuss our reintegration into galactic society. We come in peace, but we are prepared for war. The transmission ended. Silence fell over the council chamber. Zelvax looked at the faces around him. He saw fear. He saw anger. He saw confusion. But most of all, he saw the realization that everything they thought they knew had been wrong. Ambassador Catherine Moore, transported to the council station with an escort of 20 Marines. She was a small woman with gray hair and sharp eyes. Her grandmother had been alive during the exile. Her family had passed down stories of the betrayal for generations. She had dreamed of this moment since childhood. The council chamber was larger than she had imagined. The 12 seats arranged in a circle. The holographic displays showing maps of the galaxy. The weight of history pressing down from every direction. This was where humanity had been condemned. This was where her ancestors had been told they were monsters. She walked to the center of the circle and faced High Arbiter Zelvax. Her Marines took positions around her, their weapons gleaming under the lights. The council members stared at them with a mixture of fascination and horror. Zelvax spoke first. His voice was steady, but she could see his hands trembling. How is this possible? You were meant to perish. The Outer Rim cannot sustain life. Ambassador Moore smiled. It was not a warm smile. Your council made a mistake, she said. You assumed that hardship would destroy us. Instead, it made us stronger. You gave us nothing but rocks and radiation and death. We turned those things into ships and weapons and a civilization, more advanced than anything you have built in 10,000 years. Councillor Thrin rose from his seat. His voice was loud and angry. This is an invasion. These humans have violated the terms of their banishment. They must be destroyed before they threaten the entire galaxy. Moore turned to face him. She knew who he was. She had studied his history. He was the one who had convinced the Council to exile humanity. He was the architect of their suffering. You exiled 8 billion people, she said calmly. You sent us to die because you were afraid of what we might become. 1 billion of us died in the journey. 1 billion a journey. Another billion died in the first decades. My great-great-grandmother watched her husband freeze to death because there was not enough heating fuel. My grandfather lost 3 siblings to radiation sickness. Every human alive today carries the memory of what you did to us. She paused and looked around the chamber. But we did not come here for revenge. We came here because the galaxy is our home too. We were born among these stars, and we will not be denied our place among them. The question is simple. Will you welcome us as equals? Or will you make the same mistake twice? Zelvax looked at the human ambassador. He looked at the Marines with their advanced weapons. He thought about the 400 warships waiting outside. He thought about the 2,000 council vessels that were on their way. He knew that war would be devastating. He knew that the humans might actually win. And he knew that even if the council won, the cost would be unimaginable. We will discuss your request, he said finally. Please wait while the council deliberates. Ambassador Moore nodded. We have waited 300 years. We can wait a few more hours. But do not test our patience. We are not the helpless species you exiled. We are something new. Something you have never faced before. Choose wisely. She walked out of the chamber with her Marines. Behind her, the council erupted into argument. The fate of the galaxy hung in the balance. The council debated for 3 days. Inside the chamber, voices rose and fell as species argued about what to do with the humans. Some wanted to welcome them back. Others wanted to fight. The fear that had driven the original exile still lived in many hearts. Councillor Thrin spoke more than anyone else. He reminded the Council of every war in human history. He showed them recordings of human soldiers training aboard the Sentinel. He pointed at the weapons that human Marines carried. He said the same thing over and over. These creatures are dangerous. They will destroy us all if we let them live. High Arbiter Zelvax listened to everything. He was tired and old, and he wanted this to end peacefully. But he could feel the Council slipping toward war. Fear was winning. The same fear that had driven them to exile humanity 3 centuries ago. Ambassador Catherine Moore waited in the diplomatic quarters with her team. She knew what was happening in the council chamber. Human senses could detect everything. She could see the voting patterns forming. She could see the coalition that Trin was building. She sent a message to Captain Carter. They are going to reject us. Trin is convincing them to fight. Carter received the message on the bridge of the Sentinel. He had expected this. Humans had learned to plan for the worst. He turned to Commander Laura Bennett and asked for a status report. Bennett checked her displays. Council military forces are gathering at the edge of the system. Approximately 1,800 warships. They think they are being subtle, but we can see every move they make. Carter nodded. He looked at the stars through the main view screen. He thought about his ancestors who had traveled through this same space 300 years ago. They had been helpless. They had been victims. He was neither of those things. Dr. Nathan Cole approached the captain. I have been analyzing their weapon systems. They are using the same technology they had when they exiled us. They have not advanced at all. Our shields can absorb anything they throw at us. Carter turned to look at his crew. Every person on the bridge was focused and ready. They had trained their entire lives for this moment. They knew what was at stake. He opened a channel to Ambassador Moore. Catherine, I need you to leave the station. Come back to the Sentinel. Things are about to get complicated. Moore understood immediately. She gathered her Marines and headed for the transport bay. They were halfway to the shuttle when alarms began to sound throughout the station. Council security forces were mobilizing. Blast doors were closing. Thren had made his move. The Valari counselor had not waited for the official vote. He had secretly contacted his allies and arranged a surprise attack. His plan was simple. Strike the human fleet before they could react. Destroy their flagship. Kill their ambassador. Then blame the humans for starting the war. 50 Council warships decloaked around the Sentinel. They had been hiding behind a nearby moon, waiting for the signal. Their weapons charged, and they opened fire simultaneously. Lieutenant Kevin Brooks saw the attack coming before it happened. His sensors detected the energy buildup. He had his finger on the shield controls before the first shot was fired. The barrage hit the Sentinel from all directions. Energy beams that would have vaporized any Council vessel splashed harmlessly against human shields. The ship did not even shake. Brooks watched his displays and smiled. They are using everything they have. Our shields are at 98%. Captain Carter stood from his chair. He looked at the Council station through the view screen. He knew that Ambassador Moore was still aboard. He knew that she was in danger. But he also knew that this moment would define humanity's future. If he fired back immediately, humanity would be seen as the aggressors. The Council would unite against them. Even species that wanted peace would join the fight. Everything they had worked for would be lost. He made a decision that required more courage than any battle. Hold fire, he ordered. Do not return fire until I give the command. Commander Bennett stared at him. Sir, they are trying to destroy us. I know. Carter's voice was calm. But we are not going to give them what they want. We are going to show the galaxy who the real aggressors are. The battle continued for 4 minutes. 50 Council warships poured everything they had into the Sentinel. The human ship absorbed every shot without damage. Other Council vessels watched in horror as their most powerful weapons proved useless. Ambassador Moore reached her shuttle just as the attack began. She flew through the chaos, dodging debris and weapons fire. Her pilot was skilled and their shuttle was fast. They reached the Sentinel and docked safely. Only then did Captain Carter give the order. Weapons free. Disable their vessels. No lethal force unless necessary. Brooks had been waiting for those words. His fingers danced across his console. Human weapons technology was 300 years more advanced than anything the Council possessed. He could have destroyed every attacking ship in seconds. Instead, he targeted their engines with surgical precision. One by one, the Council warships went dark. Their weapons failed. Their engines died. Their shields collapsed. In less than 2 minutes, all 50 vessels were drifting helplessly in space. Their crews were alive. Their ships were intact, but they were completely disabled. High Arbiter Zelvax watched the battle from the Council station. He saw the human ship absorb an attack that should have been unstoppable. He saw it respond with restraint instead of overwhelming force. He saw 50 warships disabled without a single life lost. Then he turned to Counselor Thrin. The Valari was standing frozen, his silver skin gray with shock. His secret attack had failed completely. His treachery had been witnessed by the entire galaxy. Zelvax spoke with cold fury in his voice. You attacked a diplomatic vessel during peace negotiations. You violated every law this council upholds. You have endangered every species in the galaxy with your fear and your hatred. Thrin tried to speak, but no words came out. He had been so certain that the attack would work. He had been so convinced that humans were the threat. Now he realized that he had been the monster all along. Security forces moved toward the Valari counselor. He was placed under arrest in full view of every diplomat on the station. His allies tried to distance themselves from him. They claimed they had not known about his plan. Nobody believed them. Captain Carter opened a channel to the council. We could have destroyed your fleet. We chose not to. We could have killed thousands of your people. We chose restraint. This is who we are now. Not the species you feared. Not the monsters you imagined. We are humanity. And we are giving you one more chance to do the right thing. The trial of Counselor Thrin lasted for 3 weeks. Every species in the galaxy watched as the evidence was presented. Communications between Thrin and his allies. Records of the secret military buildup. Video footage of the unprovoked attack on a diplomatic vessel. There was no defense that could explain what he had done. High Arbiter Zelvax presided over the proceedings. He had served on the council for 3 centuries, but he had never felt such shame. The institution he had dedicated his life to had failed. First by exiling an innocent species, then by attacking them when they returned in peace. The council's reputation was shattered. Thrin was found guilty of war crimes. He was sentenced to permanent isolation on a prison world. His assets were seized and given to the species who had suffered from his actions. The Valari delegation was suspended from council, voting for 50 years. Other species who had participated in the attack faced similar consequences. Their military commanders were arrested. Their governments were forced to pay reparations. The message was clear. Treachery would not be tolerated, but punishment was only the beginning. The real question remained. What would happen to humanity now? Ambassador Catherine Moore stood before the council one final time. The chamber was quiet. Every representative watched her with a mixture of fear and respect. She was small and old, but she carried the weight of 8 billion souls behind her. She spoke simply. Humanity does not seek revenge. We did not return to conquer or to punish. We returned because this galaxy is our home too. We were born among these stars, and we will not be denied our place among them. You feared what we might become. Let us show you what we chose to become instead. High Arbiter Zelvax rose from his seat. He was the oldest being in the chamber. He had lived through more history than most species could imagine, but he had never done anything as important as what he was about to do. He walked slowly toward the human ambassador. Every eye in the chamber followed him. When he reached her, he did something that had never happened in 10,000 years of Council history. He bowed. "The Galactic Council formally rescinds the banishment of humanity," he announced. "We acknowledge that our ancestors made a terrible mistake. We acknowledge that we compounded that mistake with further violence. And we welcome the Terran sovereignty as a full member species, with all the rights and responsibilities that entails." The chamber erupted in applause. Not all of it was genuine. Some species still feared the humans. Some still resented their power. But the vote was unanimous. Nobody wanted to stand against a species that could have destroyed them and chose mercy instead. Captain Daniel Carter watched the ceremony from the bridge of the Sentinel. Commander Lara Bennett stood beside him, a rare smile on her face. They had done it. After 300 years of exile, humanity had come home. What happens now? Bennett asked. Carter looked out at the stars. The same stars his ancestors had traveled through as refugees. The same stars they had dreamed of returning to for generations. Now those stars belong to humanity again. Now we build something better, he said. Not just for humans, but for everyone. The Council feared what we might become. We showed them what we chose to become instead. Now we need to keep that promise. The work began immediately. Dr. Nathan Cole led a team of human scientists to meet with Council researchers. They shared medical technology that could cure diseases which had plagued alien species for millennia. Within a year, conditions that had been considered incurable were being treated. Billions of lives were saved. Human engineers helped design new power systems for Council worlds. Zero-point energy technology spread across the galaxy. Planets that had struggled with energy shortages suddenly had more power than they needed. Factories reopened. Economies flourished. Species that had been poor for generations began to prosper. Admiral Ryan Marshall established joint military exercises with former enemies. Human and alien officers trained together. They learned each other's tactics. They built trust through cooperation. Old rivalries faded as new friendships formed. The human embassy was constructed in orbit around the Council's capital world. It was massive structure, almost as large as the Council station itself. Tens of thousands of humans lived there, working alongside alien diplomats and scientists and artists. Children from different species played together in zero-gravity parks. The future they had dreamed of was finally becoming real. On Nova Terra, the planet that had been humanity's refuge during the long exile, a great monument was erected. It stood in the center of the capital city, visible from orbit. The structure was simple. A tall pillar of black stone, polished to a mirror finish. Carved into its surface were millions of names. Every human who had died during the banishment. Those who had perished in the journey. Those who had frozen in the first winter. Those who had starved or sickened or been killed in the civil wars. Those who had worked themselves to death, building the ships that would carry humanity home. At the base of the monument, an inscription was carved in letters of gold. They cast us into darkness. We became the light. Captain Carter visited the monument before departing for his next mission. He found his ancestor's name among the millions. Marcus Carter, who had commanded one of the first colony ships, who had lost his wife in the first winter, who had raised his daughter Elena alone, who had died in a radiation storm without ever seeing the fleet his descendants would build. Carter placed his hand on the cold stone. "We did it," he whispered. "We came home." Behind him, the Sentinel waited in orbit. 400 human warships were spread across the galaxy now, working alongside Council vessels to keep the peace. Humanity had become what the Council had feared, but they had also become something the Council had never imagined. Partners, healers, builders, friends. The exile was over. The hatred was fading. The future stretched out before them, full of possibility. And somewhere in the vast darkness of space, on worlds that humans had not yet discovered, other species heard the story of what had happened. They heard about the small species that had been cast out to die. They heard about how that species had survived and grown strong. They heard about how they had returned with the power to destroy their enemies and had chosen mercy instead. The story spread across the galaxy. It became a legend, and wherever beings gathered to talk about the future, they spoke of humanity. The species that had turned exile into strength. The species that had answered cruelty with kindness. The species that had proven that the measure of a civilization was not its capacity for destruction, but its capacity for forgiveness. The stars had a new light now, and it was human.